Substitute.
That's a bird flying into the door.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Dear Hollywood. Stage parents, toxic socialization, and poor life skills.
Child performers exist in the millions across the states. Pageants alone draw more than 3 million kids who aren't even 16 yet. Then you've got child actors who might start when they're 1 month old. You have child music prodigies, child competitive dancers, that was me, child athletes, and of course there are so many sports, child chess masters, so many young kids pursuing so many activities at a high level. American culture is obsessed with special children. Some research shows that if the child believes they chose their path in a self-determined way, they'll experience the positives of the process more. But if they feel like they've been pushed into the activity or are just trying to please their parent, they will experience the activities as stressful, and therefore it'll be more taxing and corrosive to their well-being. Well, even though I said I believe most parents have good intentions and are trying to do the right thing for their kid, many young talents are pushed into the industry by their parents, sometimes called stage parents. And sometimes the parent is chill at first, but the thrill of money coming in or pursuing Hollywood forms a grip around them, and then they become someone they never expected themselves to be. So, if you're thinking it could never be you, think again. Stage parents, at least the negative stereotype, are very demanding and competitive. They believe their child is the best, and they'll do whatever it takes to make them succeed, even if the child doesn't have much of an interest. Unsurprisingly, the parents' behavior often stems from their personal need to live vicariously through their children, to reach unfulfilled dreams, to feel a sense of importance. The industry becomes a way to sustain their own image of themselves, but there are other possible motivations. Clinical psychologist John Mayer, yes, John Mayer, says sometimes the parents' expectations of the child's performance, interest, benefit, or ownership of the activity is inaccurate. Parents might overestimate their child's talent, sense of investment, and even the positives that are coming from pursuing Hollywood, and then keep their child in the game as a result. I think this happens more often than not because many children want to be good and please their parents and say the right, nice, mannerful thing, especially if there are consequences for not doing so. So how many times will a child just keep going or keep convincing themselves that they want something just because they think they're supposed to, or that their parents are going to punish them otherwise? And kids do get punished, mistreated, and abused. Stage parents can be brutal, putting their kids on restrictive diets, forcing them to quit other activities or replace time with friends with intense training. They might sexualize their own child, putting them in revealing outfits and styling their hair and makeup in sexy, glamorous ways. They might cause a scene on set, demanding that their child be front and center, which is so humiliating for the child, by the way. They might throw their child into a bunch of extra gigs just to make a little extra money. Stage parents are at the helm of their child's professional and personal life, and oftentimes it ends up stunting the child's physical and emotional development. Research also shows that many child performers develop anxiety and depression after failing to meet the excruciatingly high demands placed on them by their parents and subsequently their own inner demands. The long-term effects of overbearing, achievement-oriented parents are really sad. One of many major outcomes is that the child does not develop their own sense of self because they've existed as an extension of their guardian's identity. The child has absorbed the narrative of who they are, what they can do, who they ought to be from their parent, and it's impossible to live up to. Yet they fear they won't be lovable if they fall short. If I'm being candid, when we celebrate kid performers who've made it as adults and who are now household names, sometimes I wonder how many of them have taken the chance to do this deeper self-work and deconstruction. Like maybe they're just still living out the story they were given, that their destiny is to be a star and that's it. While I personally do not perceive my own mother as the monstrous stage parent some of my peers have, I can relate to this false sense of self. First, to clarify, to my memory, my mom frequently told me that I could quit if it wasn't fun, and she never interfered on sets or compared me to other kids or pushed me to train harder. She frequently reminded me to remain grateful and humble and respectful. She encouraged me to stay involved in other activities and to play with friends in the neighborhood. I really felt loved by her, and she helped me learn how to face the rejection by not taking it personally. So there are a lot of positives, and I want to give her that credit. However, I clearly took it upon myself at a young age to fulfill this path in Hollywood to the absolute best of my ability, to make her and my family proud, to succeed at any cost to myself. Well, as I got older, I held on to the narrative of my life, of my identity that I was given. It was the story that every reporter has heard when they interview me. I have it memorized still, and I can repeat it verbatim at Hollywood events and family reunions alike. Well, years later, when something huge happened that basically revealed the narrative to be false, I felt like I had been living a lie. Like I was a fraud in my own life. And when I asked a relative what really happened and they had a very different perspective, I realized I'd truly been reciting a story that wasn't really my own voice or experience. But this false story kept my career in motion. It kept me going. It kept everything together. Well, hearing my relative's perspective ended up being like a portal opening, and my true self started coming forward, asking to be heard and seen. I had all kinds of questions about whose life I'd been living. It wasn't mine. Did my mom or family intend for this? No, I don't think so. I think they made a lot of sacrifices and were supportive, and relatively speaking, they did their best. And I'm 30, and last year was the first year after leaving the industry several years ago and being in therapy for a decade that I felt like my life was my own, that I was connecting to a true self. So that's one major effect on the child, and I don't know that it's avoidable, to be honest. I'm not yet convinced that a child being thrust into the spotlight at a young age ever affords a clean enough slate for authentic self-discovery. Then the child grows up. And now what? What happens to stage parents when the child inevitably gets older? Well, the parent and child have quite an arc during their time in the industry. A parent's often CEO of their kid's business. Sometimes they may be manager or employee or assistant or acting coach or best friend. And this is complicated. Whether we're talking about entertainment or any family in any situation, consider what it's like when a parent and child take on so many different roles with each other. What's healthy? Unhealthy? Where should there be boundaries? And as kids age out, you can imagine how their relationships might become strained. Parents may find themselves financially dependent on the child and feel entitled to their earnings because of the sacrifices made. There's a tendency for many parents to grow resentful when the child finally separates from them. The parent thinks the child is ungrateful for wanting to separate, or that the child owes them housing, affection, loyalty. There are many possible pathways, but one of my least favorite traits in parents of high-performing kids is the tendency to live in the past. Parents get stuck in a loop of the good old days, watching and rewatching old projects, sending messages about past experiences of being in the limelight, still requesting special perks like they used to receive. It's their point of connection. It's their source of meaning and importance. And as the child performer here, I beg you to move the fuck on. Please. Our lives are moving on. Yours needs to as well. To this day, I struggle to know how much of this was my mother's or my family's dream, whether conscious or unconscious to them. I was never explicitly told or shown by her that she wanted this for herself, yet I'm still afraid to admit that much of this wasn't my choice. After having a strong allegiance to her, it's hard to make room for holding her or others accountable. It feels easier to justify this all as a clusterfuck of unprepared people with good intentions and unconscious motives, maybe. I'm quick to defend her, and I'm quick to deny my own needs still. But I still want to hold room for many realities existing at once. So this is something I'm continuing to unpack, and I know I'm not the only adult striving for late-blooming individuation. One powerful exercise in making sense of my past was when my therapist asked me to picture my 6-year-old nephew getting into the industry. First of all, He's so tiny, he's so vulnerable, such a sponge, and he has 1,000 ideas every day. So I imagine him saying he wants to pursue acting. And right then, it was very easy to recognize that he wouldn't actually be the one making the decision if he ended up in Hollywood. It would require adults to make that happen and guide the way. And there were tons of alternative paths to support his desire for the performing arts that didn't include Hollywood. So the inflated sense of responsibility that I've carried for uprooting my family from Ohio to move to California for me to act is something I get to practice releasing. But it's hard. Little by little, I'm getting my sense of self and life back, and it's so freeing, it's so hopeful, it's exciting. It's also probably why I currently have no interest in having children or pets or even plants of my own, because I want to find myself first. Like, what does Alyson want? Who is Alyson? So, if I could sit down with parents of aspiring young performers, here are some of the questions I would want to ask. And it sounds like an interrogation, and it kind of is, but I would love to hear your answers. 1, what is going through your mind when you choose to pursue Hollywood? 2, how do you know if it's for the child's well-being or your own motive? 3, what is the cost on the rest of your family? Partners, kids, extended family, social network? 4, what are you willing to sacrifice and why? 5, what kind of check-in points are you going to establish to ensure your child and family are still doing well and they're aligned with continuing to pursue Hollywood? 6, during training or auditions, it's going to be super sensitive if you're constantly watching and or critiquing your child. It can also be difficult if you're apathetic and passive. So how might you find healthy and supportive ways to help your child through the daily industry processes, like auditions and meetings, training, show days? 7, what tools will you provide your child to help them regulate their emotions, physical state, and psychological state before, during, and after performing? If you don't know what this means or how to provide the support, it's a red flag to subject them to this extreme environment. 8, what about the rest of their lives? School, friends, learning about finances, holidays, the normal things. What are the short and long-term effects if your lifestyle is dominated by the industry? 9, let's talk a little bit about the role reversals. When your child starts making money, when they gain power and status, how are you going to feel? What are you going to do? What is your role over the course of their career development? How are you going to communicate with them about this? 10, when there are multiple kid actors on a project, there are going to be multiple families on set, and each will bring their own values, beliefs, personalities, and drama. This can lead to major clashes. Some shows, including on your child's favorite networks, end up having restraining orders issued between families. So, how will you navigate these environments packed with other kids and guardians? How are you going to cultivate a healthy support network? 11, many sets are going to bend the rules. They're going to request that your child works longer hours. Sometimes the director or other castmates are going to be cruel and harsh to your kid. Sometimes the studio will request significant control over their name, likeness, and appearance. As a parent, it can be nerve-wracking and scary, overwhelming to know how to advocate for your child and who to stand up to. So what will you do in these situations? Who will you approach, and what approach will you use? 12, what support system do you have in place to cope with the inevitable disruptions to your child's and family's normal life? Oh, you don't? 13, your child will one day grow up and age out of your care. Just like parents who lose themselves in their kids' hobbies or academics, it can be hard to know where you belong and what to do after they're 18 or emancipated. What do you believe you're entitled to, and why? Who are you outside of the industry and supporting your child performer? How are you going to move forward and support your child's individuation? 14, how old should a child be in order to get into the industry, if ever? What age should a parent listen to what the child's saying they want and actually allow it to happen? If a 7-year-old begs you to act, do you let them do it? If not, why? If so, in what ways? If a 16-year-old begs you to act, do you let them do it? If not, why? If so, in what ways? 15, lastly, How much responsibility do you believe we can place on a child as we ask them whether or not they want to pursue something they can't even fully comprehend? A professional full-time career. And if it's not a career or an investment, how will you categorize it and let it manifest differently? If you haven't thought through these questions or found someone who can provide insight for them, I would strongly suggest not entering the industry until you do so. You might be the most loving parent with the best intentions. That's not enough to protect your child in a commercial industry. So by now, we've covered so much territory in the toddler to train wreck pipeline that you can name several factors that contribute to a child performer's abnormal social development. The odd life experiences, fame, having untrustworthy people around us. So I don't want to be too repetitive. I'm just going to provide a little context on a few points, and then I actually want to move the conversation into new territory, social media, and discuss how this whole new element is affecting not only young performers, but also all our younger generation's social development and well-being. But first, for the aliens known as child actors, why are so many of us so poorly adjusted? Well, pulling from my own life allowed me to reveal more of my awkwardness. As unrelatable as this may be, there are many normal life events that I've portrayed in auditions or on camera that I haven't actually experienced, or at least I hadn't at the time of filming, such as having my first kiss on camera, going to school dances and prom in I don't know how many shows, getting crushes and going on first dates to the movies, high school sports or clubs. I've been on so many teams without ever being on a single team. Playing a character who can drive before I even had a license, graduating, going off to college, living in dorms. I've never done any of that in my life. We missed regular activities that, quote unquote, normal people don't think twice about. And or by the time we tried them, we didn't get to do them in a normal way. Going on your first date with paparazzi and security guards and an invested fan base is not normal. But it's not just the extracurriculars. It's also basic life skills. When I hosted the roundtable conversation with other former kid performers, we realized many of us share similar deficiencies or idiosyncrasies, we might call them. An example is like someone can perform a 3-hour concert in front of hundreds of thousands of people, but they don't know how to pump gas. Or like you can portray a character who has a sleepover with friends because there's a script, but in real life, you would have zero clue how to act at a real sleepover. Parents can do their best to help children maintain a normal life, but once the industry and fame dominate, your upbringing is anything but normal. The next aspect is that we grow up quickly, so it's hard to relate to other kids our age. We're surrounded by adults who become our peers, and the other young kids around us are fellow thespians. They are fucking weird too. This is gonna sound like I was an asshole, and maybe I was, but like by 9 years old, I found normal kids to be unstimulating and immature. I mean, I had a job by then. My reference points and responsibilities were so different. When other kids watched movies, they were watching a made-up story and dreaming of being the superhero. When I watched movies, I was analyzing the cinematography, the actors' choices, and spotting my friends in the film like, oh my gosh, Naomi, good for her. She's been putting in a lot of effort. She deserves this. Additionally, once I started experiencing fame, the dynamic when meeting other kids shifted. Instead of a clean slate with strangers meeting each other, I was perceived as a person with status. Even though that's all built on an illusion, there's still a material impact. So I was not only on display and needing to be professional towards other kids, I was often also holding space for them to share their feelings about projects I was in or characters I played. I didn't know this wasn't normal, but I was like playing therapist for fans. At some point, it just became easier to bond with other industry kids who had similarly weird lives. And then boom, now you're in an industry bubble. Something I actually feel quite sad and regretful about is the way that the industry reinforces quite a self-centered lifestyle. I felt like such a bad friend to other kids, even though I didn't want to be, but I couldn't be there when they needed me. I missed their birthdays and I missed their special occasions. I remember in my teens, I could feel my two closest non-industry friends beginning to focus on other friendships, and I felt so disappointed in myself because I knew I couldn't be around. My life revolved around my career, around me. And interestingly, I do observe that as some famous kids age, they continue to create this friend dynamic where they're the central focus and the friends around them are more like a posse than mutual friends. Well, for me, it wasn't until my early to mid-20s that I began decentering myself and creating more reciprocal relationships. I'll just name one more factor briefly again, which is trust. When you're a famous kid, it's really complicated to decipher why anyone is asking or trying to be in your life. Is it because they work for you? Is it because they want to be closer to someone who's famous? Do they genuinely like you? Will they share your personal information with others? Building authentic, long-term relationships is just challenging. So, these and other factors mentioned throughout this series help contextualize why some kid actors appear to be poorly adjusted adults with limited social skills and life skills. But now I want to open a whole new can of worms around socialization, which is, what do we do in this era of social media? We have a whole new generation of kid influencers who are filming their lives all day long and making bank from brands. And regular kids are also presenting themselves online. We're in an age where everyone online is learning to manage their own publicity versus privacy, to deal with hateful comments and face the pressures to get followers and likes. Young people are bearing the brunt of this, and it's taking an alarming toll on their well-being. For content creators like myself, we're up close and personal with the platforms, so I want to peel back the curtain and share more about what's happening behind the scenes with social media. After all, it is the newest and potentially most dangerous stop in the toddler to train wreck pipeline. But before we talk about the dangers of algorithms running our lives, do you mind liking, commenting, and subscribing? Please. It keeps me hired and well-fed. The way I see it is like, this is a way to amplify things that you want to see more of, and by liking and commenting and subscribing and engaging with the content, that's how we're able to say, hey, this is the conversation we want to have, versus, just liking for the sake of like validating my ego. So if this is meaningful to you, you're finding value in this podcast, please do take a moment to like, comment, and subscribe. And I'll see you there on the next episode of The Price is Right.
On the next episode,
So you could literally leap from meme maker to movie star.
a moment of silence for the trained actors and production crew who must work with you. Godspeed.